The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain when Samuel Hawkins first heard about the cabin. He'd come to town for nothing more than a sack of flour and maybe a glimpse of civilization after 3 months of drifting. But fate had other plans. 30 cents! The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square, drawing a scattered crowd of townsfolk seeking entertainment on a dreary Tuesday. Do I hear 30 cents for the old McKenna place? Samuel paused, his worn boots squelching in the mud. 30 cents. He had exactly 43 cents to his name, saved from odd jobs and charity meals. His stomach had been empty for 2 days, but something about the auctioneer's tone made him turn. The crowd laughed, sharp, mean laughter that reminded Samuel of coyotes circling wounded prey. Women in their bonnets whispered behind gloved hands, while men in their Sunday best shook their heads with knowing smirks. "Ain't nobody fool enough to take that cursed land," muttered a shopkeeper near Samuel. "Not after what happened." "What happened?" Samuel asked. But the man had already moved away, suddenly interested in examining his pocket watch. The auctioneer, a portly man named Josiah Whitfield, wiped sweat from his brow despite the cool October air. "Come now, folks. It's a legal sale. The county needs to clear these properties. Surely someone—" "I'll take it." The words left Samuel's mouth before his mind could catch up. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Every eye turned to him, the stranger in the threadbare Union coat, patches showing where his sergeant's stripes used to be. His face bore the gaunt look of a man who'd seen too much and eaten too little. The war had ended 15 years ago, but it still lived in the hollows of his cheeks and the slight tremor in his left hand. "You, sir?" Whitfield's voice cracked. "You wish to bid on the McKenna property?" Samuel stepped forward, ignoring the way the crowd parted like he carried plague. 30 cents, you said?" A woman grabbed her child and pulled him close. Men who'd been lounging against the courthouse pillars straightened up, hands moving unconsciously toward hidden weapons. The atmosphere had shifted from mockery to something darker. "Son," an elderly man in a banker's suit stepped forward. Theodore Blackwood, Samuel would later learn, the most powerful man in 3 counties. "You don't know what you're doing. That land, it's not fit for living. With respect, sir, I've slept in places that would make hell look hospitable. A roof is a roof." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, taking in Samuel's worn appearance. "You're new here, a drifter. We don't want trouble in our town. Don't plan on giving any. Just need a place to rest these bones." The banker leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive tobacco and something sour. "That cabin has history, boy. Dark history. The kind that don't wash clean with time or prayer. You buy that land, you buy everything that comes with it." Samuel met his gaze steadily. He'd faced Confederate cavalry charges and Union officers who'd sent good men to die for bad reasons. One rich man's threats didn't amount to much anymore. "Then I reckon 30 cents is a bargain." The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "Going once." The crowd held its breath. Several men exchanged meaningful glances. A young woman in black, strange, Samuel thought, since he'd heard of no recent funerals, stood at the edge of the square, watching with unusual intensity. "Going twice." Mayor Cornelius Hayes pushed through the crowd, his face flushed. "Whitfield, surely we should discuss—" "Sold!" The gavel came down with finality. The sound echoed across the square like a gunshot. The crowd dispersed quickly, leaving Samuel standing alone with the auctioneer, who looked like he'd just signed someone's death warrant. "You'll need to sign the papers," Whitfield said quietly, leading Samuel into the courthouse. His hands shook as he prepared the documents. "The cabin's 8 miles north. Follow the old timber road until you see a lightning-struck oak, then west into the woods. You'll find it, if you're meant to." "If I'm meant to?" Whitfield didn't answer, just pushed the papers across the desk. Samuel counted out 30 cents in tarnished coins, money that should have bought him food, maybe a night in a boarding house. "One more thing," Whitfield said as Samuel turned to leave. "Whatever you find there, whatever you think you see or hear, some secrets are better left buried. The McKenna place has been empty for 12 years, and there's good reason for that." Outside, the October sun had broken through the clouds, but it brought no warmth. Samuel found the general store where he'd planned to buy flour. The proprietor, a nervous man named Josiah Pruitt, took one look at him and stepped back. "You're the one who bought the McKenna place." News traveled fast in small towns. "I am." Pruitt's hands trembled as he measured out flour. "Take this, no charge, and some salt pork, dried beans too." He pushed the supplies across the counter like he was feeding a condemned man his last meal. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity." Pruitt's voice dropped to a whisper. Call it a farewell gift. When you get to that cabin, when night falls, you remember that Henry Pruitt tried to do right by you. You remember that not everyone in this town agreed with what happened." "What happened?" Samuel asked for the second time that day. Pruitt's face went pale. "The McKennas were good people. They didn't deserve— Just take the food, stranger. And if you're smart, you'll keep riding past that cabin and never look back." But Samuel had stopped being smart the day he'd volunteered for a war that took everything and gave back only ghosts. He loaded the supplies onto his horse, a sad-looking mare he'd acquired in trade for his last good boots, and headed north. The town disappeared behind him, but he felt eyes watching from every window. The woman in black stood at the edge of town, her dark dress stark against the pale road. As he passed, she raised her hand. In warning or farewell, he couldn't tell. The timber road was overgrown, barely more than a deer track in places. His mare picked her way carefully through the ruts and roots. The further he rode, the quieter the world became, until even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. He found the lightning-struck oak just as the sun began its descent. The tree stood like a broken monument, its trunk split and blackened, arms reaching toward heaven in permanent supplication. The path west was even fainter, marked only by the absence of the thickest brambles. The forest closed in, dense and primordial. These weren't the tame woods near town, but something older, darker. The kind of forest where native tribes once whispered of spirits and settlers disappeared without explanation. As shadows lengthened, Samuel wondered what kind of secret could be worth all this fear. What could make an entire town treat a piece of land like it was cursed? He'd seen men do terrible things in war, had done some himself in the name of survival. But this felt different. This was peacetime fear, the kind that festered in silence and grew stronger with each passing year. His mare whinnied nervously as they pushed deeper into the woods. Soon, he told himself. Soon he'd see this cabin he'd bought for 30 cents. Soon he'd understand why hardened men looked afraid, and why women clutched their children at its mention. The sun dipped below the tree line, painting the forest in shades of blood and shadow. Somewhere in the growing darkness, his new home waited, along with whatever secrets had kept it empty for 12 long years. Samuel Hawkins had survived Antietam and Gettysburg, had walked through fields carpeted with the dead and dying. He'd thought nothing could frighten him anymore. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The path ended abruptly at a wall of brambles so thick it seemed nature itself had tried to hide what lay beyond. Samuel dismounted, his mare stamping nervously as he pulled out his knife to cut through the tangled vines. Each slash revealed more of the same, thorns and twisted branches that caught at his clothes like desperate fingers. It took nearly an hour to clear enough space for him and the horse to pass through. By then, full darkness had fallen, and only the pale moon provided light. When he finally pushed through the last barrier, what he saw made him understand why the townspeople had looked at him with such pity. The cabin squatted in a small clearing like a wounded animal. Half the roof had caved in, and vines had claimed the walls so completely that it seemed more plant than structure. The windows, those that remained, stared out like empty eye sockets. A stone chimney rose crookedly from one end, its top broken off jaggedly. But it was the silence that struck him most. Not the peaceful quiet of wilderness, but something oppressive and waiting. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath here. Samuel tied his mare to a sturdy oak at the clearing's edge, far enough from the cabin that she could flee if needed. She whinnied softly, eyes rolling white in the moonlight. He'd never seen her so spooked, not even when they'd crossed paths with a bear last spring. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges. Samuel pushed it open, wincing at the shriek of metal on metal. Inside, moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating a scene of long abandonment. Furniture lay overturned and rotting. In one corner, a table had collapsed, Its legs splayed like a dead spider. Leaves and debris covered everything in a thick carpet that crunched under his boots. The smell hit him then. Mold and decay, yes, but underneath something else. Char. Old smoke. As his eyes adjusted, he could see the blackened marks on the walls, the way certain boards were darker than others. There had been a fire here, but not recent. This damage was old, partially reclaimed by time and weather. Samuel set his lantern on what remained of a stone hearth and lit it with precious matches. The yellow light pushed back the darkness, but somehow made the shadows deeper. He could see more now. Scraps of fabric caught in the corners, the remains of what might have been curtains. On one wall, the ghost of a picture frame marked where something had protected the wood from smoke damage. He'd slept in worse places. During the war, he'd made camp in burnt-out barns and churches turned to rubble. But those places had felt empty, cleansed by violence. This cabin felt full of something waiting, watching. Shaking off the feeling, Samuel set about making the place habitable for the night. He cleared a space near the hearth, sweeping away debris with a broken branch. His bedroll would have to do for now. Tomorrow he could assess what needed fixing, assuming the whole structure didn't collapse on him in the night. He brought in his supplies from the mare, along with his rifle and the few possessions he owned. A dented tin cup, a leather-bound Bible with half its pages missing, a photograph of a woman whose name he'd forgotten in the haze of laudanum and pain after Chancellorsville. The hearth, at least, seemed solid. Samuel gathered dry wood from inside the cabin, broken furniture mostly, and built a small fire. The smoke drew properly, which was a mercy. As warmth began to seep into the cold space, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 30 cents for shelter, even shelter like this, was indeed a bargain. He was heating beans in his tin pot when he heard it, a sound like wind through the trees, except the air outside was still. It came from somewhere deeper in the cabin, beyond the main room where he sat. Samuel froze, hand moving instinctively to his rifle. The sound came again, almost like whispers, but not quite, like voices heard through water or from a great distance. He stood slowly, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other, and moved toward the back of the cabin. A narrow hallway led to what must have been bedrooms. The first door he tried was swollen shut with moisture and age. The second opened onto a small room, empty except for the skeletal remains of a bed frame. But it was the third room that made him stop cold. The fire damage was worst here. The walls were black as pitch, and the floorboards near the window had burned through completely, leaving gaps that showed the earth below. But that wasn't what held his attention. On the far wall, someone had carved words deep into the charred wood. The cuts were frantic, desperate, made by someone in a hurry or in fear. They killed us for knowing. Below that, harder to read, Blackwood Hayes Morrison guilty. And finally, almost illegible, find Mary, she knows. Samuel ran his fingers over the carved words. The edges were smooth, worn by time. 12 years, the auctioneer had said. 12 years this cabin had stood empty. He thought of Theodore Blackwood's cold eyes, Mayor Hayes's flushed face. Morrison. He didn't know that name yet, but he suspected he would. A board creaked behind him. Samuel spun, rifle raised, but the hallway was empty. Just the cabin settling, he told himself, though his soldier's instincts said otherwise. He'd learned in the war to trust those instincts. They'd saved his life more than once. He returned to the main room and his meager dinner, but appetite had fled. The beans tasted like ash in his mouth. Outside, his mare nickered nervously, pulling at her rope. The moon had risen full, casting everything in sharp relief. Through the broken windows, the forest seemed to press closer, as if trying to reclaim what man had built. Samuel tried to focus on practical matters. Tomorrow, he'd need to clear more of the vines, see about patching the roof. He'd need tools, supplies. But returning to town seemed dangerous now. He'd seen something he wasn't meant to see, learned names he wasn't supposed to know. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually won. He dozed fitfully by the dying fire, rifle across his lap, starting awake at every sound. Once, deep in the night, he could have sworn he heard footsteps in the hallway. Another time, a woman's voice, soft and sad, singing a lullaby he almost recognized. Near dawn, he woke to find his breath misting in the cold air. The fire had died completely. As he sat up, stiff and aching, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the ashes of the fireplace, someone, or something, had drawn a pattern. It looked like letters, though he couldn't make them out clearly. He was still staring at the ashes when he heard it, clear as day this time. A woman's voice coming from outside. "You shouldn't have come here." Samuel grabbed his rifle and rushed to the door, throwing it open to the gray pre-dawn light. The clearing was empty except for morning mist clinging to the ground. His mare stood where he'd tied her, but her ears were pricked forward, focused on something he couldn't see. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough from sleep. Only silence answered. But as he turned to go back inside, he saw them, footprints in the dew-wet grass. Small, delicate. A woman's boots. They led from the forest edge to just below the window of the burned room, then simply stopped. Samuel Hawkins had thought he was buying a cabin. What he'd really purchased was a mystery written in char and blood, a secret that powerful men had killed to keep buried. And somewhere in these dark woods, someone, or something, was watching, waiting to see what he would do with the knowledge carved into burned walls. The sun broke through the trees, bringing no warmth to the cursed ground of the McKenna place. Samuel stood in the doorway of his 30-cent cabin and wondered if he'd live long enough to learn the truth, or if he'd become just another ghost in these haunted woods. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist but not the chill that seemed to emanate from the cabin itself. Samuel spent the early hours clearing debris from the main room, trying to make the place somewhat livable. He was prying rotted boards from a window frame when he sensed he was no longer alone. She stood at the edge of the clearing where the footprints had ended, so still she might have been part of the forest itself. Dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, uncommon for a respectable woman. Her dress was simple homespun, gray as morning fog, and her feet were indeed clad in the kind of boots that had made those prints. Samuel lowered his hammer slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am?" She didn't flee as he expected. Instead, she studied him with eyes the color of autumn leaves, sad and knowing. "You're the fool who bought this place." "Samuel Hawkins, ma'am, and I prefer optimist to fool." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Optimists don't usually last long out here." She moved closer, each step deliberate and graceful despite the rough ground. "I'm Mary. Mary Fletcher." The name hit him like cold water. Mary. Find Mary she knows. His eyes must have shown his recognition because she nodded slowly. "You've seen the writing." "I have." She was close enough now that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and carried burdens. Mid-30s, he guessed, though sorrow had a way of aging people beyond their years. "Then you're already in danger." Her voice carried a slight rasp, as if she'd spent too long in silence. "They'll know soon enough that someone's living here again. They have eyes everywhere." Who are they? Mary glanced around the clearing as if the trees themselves might be listening. "May I come in? It's not safe to speak of such things in the open." Samuel stepped aside, gesturing to the cabin. She entered without hesitation, though he noticed how her hand trembled slightly as she crossed the threshold. Inside, she moved with familiarity, avoiding the weak boards, skirting the damaged areas. "You knew the McKennas," he said. It wasn't a question. "I was Margaret McKenna's cousin." She stood by the cold hearth, running her fingers along the stonework. "I was here the night they died." Samuel pulled up the least damaged chair he could find, offering it to her. She sat carefully, back straight, hands folded in her lap. He remained standing, giving her space. "Tell me." Mary's eyes grew distant. "Thomas McKenna was a good man. Too good, maybe. He came here from Pennsylvania, bought this land fair and square from old Jacob Morse, built this cabin with his own hands for Margaret and their boys." She paused, gathering herself. Thomas had a head for numbers, kept books for some of the local businesses. That's how he found out about the railroad. Railroad? The one that was supposed to come through. Government contracts, land grants, enough money to make rich men richer. But the route they'd submitted to Washington wasn't the route they planned to build. The real path would go through Indian treaty land, sacred burial grounds, illegal but profitable. Samuel thought of the men at the courthouse, their fine clothes and cold eyes. Blackwood, Hayes, and Morrison, among others, but those three were the leaders. They'd already bought up the land along the secret route for pennies, stood to make fortunes when the railroad came through. All they needed was to keep it quiet until the deals were done. Wind rattled the loose boards, and Mary shivered. Thomas tried to do the right thing, wrote to the federal authorities, gathered evidence. He thought the law would protect him. The law rarely protects anyone from men with money. You sound like you know. I've seen enough. Samuel moved to the window, checking the tree line. Old habits. What happened then? They came at night, maybe 20 men, faces covered. I was spending the week here, helping Margaret with the boys while Thomas was sick with fever. We heard horses, saw torches through the windows. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Thomas tried to reason with them. They shot him on the front step. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd seen too much violence, but the murder of an unarmed man in front of his family still kindled old anger. Margaret tried to protect the boys. They didn't discriminate, said the whole family knew too much. I hid in the root cellar. Coward that I was, I hid while they... She couldn't finish. You survived. That's not cowardice. Is it not? Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. I heard everything, the screams, the gunshots. Then they set the fire. Probably thought it would destroy the evidence Thomas had gathered, but they didn't know about the cellar or the metal box hidden there. She stood abruptly, moving to the burned room. Samuel followed. In the corner where the floor had burned through, Mary knelt and pulled at a blackened board. It came away to reveal a small space beneath. I came back weeks later, after the ashes cooled. I carved those words, left the evidence hidden, but I was too afraid to act on it. 12 years I've carried this secret. 12 years of watching those men prosper while the McKennas lie in unmarked graves. She reached into the space and pulled out a metal box, its surface rust-pitted but intact. Letters, contracts, maps, everything Thomas gathered. Enough to see them hang if justice existed in this world. Samuel took the box, feeling its weight. Why didn't you? Because I'm alone. A woman with no family, no connections, no money. Who would believe me over the richest men in 3 counties? But you. She studied him with those sad, knowing eyes. You're different. You have the look of a man who's already lost everything. That obvious? To someone else who's been emptied out by loss, yes. They stood close in the burned room, surrounded by char and secrets. Samuel could smell lavender on her, incongruous in this place of death. She was beautiful in the way broken things could be beautiful, sharp edges and dangerous grace. Why warn me? He asked. Why not let me discover this on my own? Because they'll kill you if you stay. Just like they killed the last man who tried to live here, and the one before that. This land is cursed, but not by ghosts. By living men who can't afford to let the dead speak. And if I don't run, Mary searched his face, then you're either very brave or very foolish. Either way, you won't last a month. I've lasted through worse. Have you? She moved past him, back to the main room. War is honest violence. This is something else. They'll come at night like they did before. Or maybe they'll be smarter. Poison your well, spook your horse on a cliff trail, arrange an accident that no one questions. Samuel hefted the box. This evidence, it's still good. Names, dates, amounts. Maps showing the real railroad route. Letters discussing the bribes, the false surveys. Yes, it's good. But evidence is only useful if you live to present it. Then I'd better stay alive. Mary laughed, a sound like water over stones. Just like that? You'll take on the most powerful men in the territory for people you never knew? Someone should have, 12 years ago. Someone tried. Thomas McKenna tried. Then maybe it's time someone finished what he started. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You really mean that? I've got nothing to lose, remember? Makes a man dangerous. Or dead. But there was something else in her voice now. Not quite hope, but the shadow of it. If you're serious about this, you'll need help. Information about who to trust, who to avoid. and you'll need to be smarter than Thomas was. Will you help me? Mary moved to the door, pausing at the threshold. I've been dead inside for 12 years, Mr. Hawkins. Maybe it's time I started living again, even if it kills me. She turned back. I have a small place 2 miles north, an old hunting shack most folks have forgotten. If you need me, follow the creek upstream until you see a lightning-split pine. I'll know if you're coming. How? The same way I knew you were here. This forest talks to those who listen. She stepped outside, then looked back one more time. Burn some sage in that cabin tonight. It won't keep the living away, but it might help you sleep. Then she was gone, moving through the trees with the silence of someone who'd learned that making noise could get you killed. Samuel stood in the doorway, holding a box full of dangerous truth. Watching the empty space where she'd been, he'd come here looking for solitude and found instead a murdered family's legacy and a woman haunted by survivor's guilt. The wise thing would be to saddle his horse and ride on, leave this cursed place to its ghosts and secrets. But Samuel Hawkins had stopped doing the wise thing long ago. He looked down at the metal box, then back at his 30-cent cabin. Tomorrow he'd start repairs in earnest. He'd need this place fortified if he was going to war with the men who ruled this territory. And somewhere in the forest, a woman named Mary Fletcher was perhaps thinking the same thing, that after 12 years of hiding, it might finally be time to fight. The metal box sat on the makeshift table like a loaded gun. Samuel had spent the afternoon studying its contents by lamplight, each document painting a clearer picture of conspiracy and murder. Thomas McKenna had been thorough, too thorough for his own good. Maps showed 2 different railroad routes, one filed with the federal government, another marked actual in Thomas's neat handwriting. Letters between Blackwood, Hayes, and Morrison discussed payments to surveyors, bribes to territorial officials, and plans to remove obstacles, both legal and human. One letter, dated just weeks before the McKenna murders, was particularly damning. The Pennsylvania man grows troublesome. His questions at the land office have attracted attention. Morrison suggests we handle this as we did the Indian problem last spring. I concur. Some fires purify. TB. Samuel recognized Blackwood's initials. The casual way they discussed murder turned his stomach. He'd killed in war, but that was face-to-face, honest in its brutality. This was something else, evil dressed in respectability. As evening approached, he prepared for visitors. The evidence went back into its hiding place, carefully concealed. He loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, and positioned himself where he could watch both the door and windows. If they came tonight, he'd be ready. But instead of armed men, Mary Fletcher emerged from the darkening forest, carrying a covered basket and a bundle of dried sage. She moved differently than she had that morning, less like a ghost, more like a woman with purpose. "You're still here," she said, not quite hiding her surprise. Disappointed? Relieved, actually. I half expected to find fresh ashes. She entered without invitation, setting her basket on the table. "I brought food. Figured you'd be living on beans and hardtack." The smell of fresh bread and stewed rabbit filled the cabin. Samuel's stomach clenched with hunger he hadn't let himself acknowledge. When had he last eaten a proper meal? "This is kind of you, Miss Fletcher." "Mary," she corrected, unwrapping the food. "And it's practical, not kind. You'll need your strength for what's coming." They ate in companionable silence as darkness settled over the forest. Mary had brought 2 plates, suggesting she'd planned to stay. In the lamplight, Samuel could see details he'd missed that morning. A thin scar along her jawline, calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work. "Tell me about that night," he said eventually. "All of it." Mary set down her fork, staring into the flame. "April 17th, 1868. I remember because it was little James's birthday the next day. Margaret had baked a cake." She told him everything, the sound of horses, the masked men, Thomas's attempts to protect his family, how 6-year-old James had tried to shield his younger brother Daniel, how Margaret had fought like a wildcat until a rifle butt ended her struggles. "The fire was an afterthought," Mary continued, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "They'd already done their killing, but Blackwood," I recognized his voice, "said to burn it all." "No martyrs," he said. "Just a tragic accident." "You're certain it was him?" Theodore Blackwood has a distinctive voice, cultured, with a hint of Virginia gentility. He likes to quote Shakespeare when he thinks he's being clever. Her lips twisted. He quoted Macbeth that night. "What's done cannot be undone." I'll never forget it. Samuel poured water from his canteen, offering it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and he felt a jolt of something he'd thought dead since Chancellorsville. "After the fire died, I searched for survivors," Mary continued. "Found none. The county sheriff came eventually. Hayes's man, of course, ruled it an accident. Said Thomas must have knocked over a lamp in his fever. Case closed. And you kept quiet. What choice did I have? A woman's word against theirs?" She laughed bitterly. "I tried once. Went to a federal marshal passing through. He listened politely, then told me grief could make people imagine things. Later, I found out he dined with Blackwood that very night. The sage bundle lay between them. Mary picked it up, along with a brass dish from her basket. The Cheyenne taught me this before they were driven out. Smoke to cleanse a place of sorrow." She lit the sage, letting the smoke drift through the cabin. The scent was sharp, earthy, somehow comforting. As she moved through the rooms, Samuel found himself watching her. The graceful way she moved, the reverent way she handled the burning herbs. "You knew the natives?" "My father was a trader, honest unlike most. The tribes trusted him, taught us things." She returned to the main room, setting the smoldering sage in its dish. "That's how I know these woods so well. They showed me the old paths, the hidden places. Useful knowledge. It's kept me alive." She sat across from him again, closer this time. "Just as your war knowledge will keep you alive. Tell me, Samuel Hawkins, what did you do in the army?" "Cavalry scout, sometimes behind enemy lines." "Ah, that explains the way you watch the windows." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "Good. You'll need those instincts." They talked as the night deepened, sharing stories in the way of people who've known too much loss. Mary told him about her life since the murders, the small jobs she took, the way she'd learned to be invisible in town, always watching the men who'd killed her family. "Morrison owns the bank now," she said. "Hayes has been mayor for 8 years running. And Blackwood, he controls everything else, the store, the mill, half the land in the county. Blood money, all of it. They must know you survived." "They know, but I'm careful, and I'm useful. I take in washing, mend clothes. Even guilty men need clean shirts." Her smile was sharp. "It's amazing what people say when they think you're not worth noticing." Samuel found himself telling her about the war, about the battles that haunted him and the woman in the photograph he carried but couldn't quite remember, about the months of drifting after, looking for something he couldn't name. "Maybe you were looking for this," Mary said softly. "A reason to fight again, a cause worth believing in." "Maybe I was just looking for a place to die." "Were you?" She leaned forward, studying him with those autumn eyes. "Because a man looking to die doesn't prepare defenses, doesn't hide evidence, doesn't ask questions about his enemies." The lamp flame flickered between them. Samuel was acutely aware of her presence, the way the light caught in her hair, the determined set of her jaw. When was the last time he'd felt anything beyond numbness? "I should go," Mary said suddenly, standing. "It's late, and being seen here would raise questions." Samuel stood too, not wanting her to leave, but knowing she was right. "Will you come again?" "Someone needs to make sure you're eating properly." She gathered her things, then paused. "There's something else. Something I didn't tell you this morning." "What?" "Thomas hid more than documents. There's gold. Payment from the railroad men for his silence. He was going to use it as evidence, but—" She shrugged. "It's yours now, with the land, hidden beneath the old oak behind the cabin, marked with his initials." "Why tell me this?" "Because you'll need resources if you're serious about justice, and because—" She met his eyes. "Because I think you might be the one to finally make this right." She moved to the door, then turned back. "Be careful, Samuel. They'll test you first, small things to see if you'll run. When you don't, they'll escalate. And remember, not everyone who smiles is a friend. And not everyone who warns is an enemy." "Exactly." She smiled again, that transformative expression. "I'll come tomorrow night. Try not to get killed before then." Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of sage and lavender. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching the darkness where she'd vanished. The forest was quiet except for the usual night sounds: owls, wind, the creak of old wood. He thought about the gold she'd mentioned but didn't go looking for it. Tomorrow would be soon enough. Tonight, he had too much to process: the evidence, the conspiracy, and the unexpected presence of Mary Fletcher in his life. The cabin felt different with the sage smoke, less oppressive somehow. Or maybe it was just knowing he wasn't alone in this fight anymore. For 12 years, Mary had carried this burden by herself. Now they would carry it together. Samuel barred the door and settled in for the night, rifle close at hand. Outside, something moved in the underbrush. Probably just a deer, but he tracked the sound anyway. Mary was right. They would test him, and when they did, he'd be ready. In the dying lamplight, he pulled out the photograph from his pocket. The woman's face was faded, lost to time and memory. But Mary Fletcher's face was vivid, alive, dangerous in its clarity. He put the photograph away and tried not to think about what that might mean. The sage smoke curled toward the gaps in the roof, carrying with it the ghosts of the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, for the first time in years, Samuel Hawkins didn't feel entirely alone. The days fell into a rhythm that Samuel hadn't known since before the war. Mornings were for repairs, patching the roof, reinforcing walls, clearing decades of forest encroachment. Afternoons he spent scouting the surrounding woods, learning every trail and hiding spot. And evenings belonged to Mary. She came just after dusk each night, always bringing food and news from town. They would eat by lamplight while she told him about overheard conversations, shifts in the powerful men's routines, which lawmen could be trusted, none, and which might be swayed, possibly one or two. "Judge Garrett arrives next month for the circuit court," Mary said one evening, ladling venison stew into bowls. "He's from the capital, no local ties. If we could get the evidence to him." They'd never let it reach trial. Samuel tested a newly repaired shutter. 3 weeks of hard work had made the cabin defensible, if not comfortable. Men like Blackwood don't leave such things to chance. Mary sighed, knowing he was right. Then what do? We wait. We prepare. We let them wonder what I'm planning. He sat across from her, their knees almost touching in the small space. Fear makes men stupid. Stupid men make mistakes. These evening meals had become the highlight of his days. Not just for the food, though Mary was an excellent cook, but for her company. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories that had nothing to do with murder or conspiracy. She told him about her father's trading post, about growing up between two worlds. He shared memories of Ohio farmland, of a younger man who'd believed in causes and countries. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, two damaged souls finding peace in proximity. "You're different than when you arrived," Mary observed one night, studying him over her coffee cup. Real coffee, a luxury she'd somehow procured. "How so?" "Less hollow, like something's filling you back up." Samuel knew what she meant. The numbness that had encased him since the war was cracking, letting in light and pain and something that might have been hope. Much of that was due to purpose, to having a reason to rise each morning, but not all of it. "You're different too," he said. "Am I?" But she smiled, knowing it was true. The ghost woman who'd warned him that first morning had gained substance, solidity. Her laughter came easier now, usually at his expense when he managed to burn their dinner or hit his thumb with a hammer. One evening she arrived later than usual, breathless and agitated. "They know," she said without preamble, "about my visits." Samuel tensed, hand moving to his rifle. "Who? How?" "Morrison's man saw me on the trail. I took a different route, but—" She sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "It was bound to happen eventually. You can't come anymore. It's too dangerous." "No." The word came out sharp, decisive. "I've hidden for 12 years. No more. Mary." "No, Samuel." She stood, pacing the small space. "Do you know what it's like, seeing them every day? Washing their clothes, mending their shirts, smiling and curtsying like I don't know their hands are soaked in blood. I'm done being a ghost." He caught her shoulders, stilling her movement. "Getting yourself killed won't bring them back. Neither will hiding." Her eyes blazed with sudden fire. "I used to be someone, before that night. I had opinions, dreams, a sharp tongue that got me in trouble. Then they took everything and I became nothing. A shadow. But these weeks—" She trailed off. Looking up at him, they stood close, closer than propriety allowed. Samuel could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the lavender she always carried. "These weeks?" he prompted softly. "I remember who I was, who I could be again." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't ask me to go back to being a ghost." The moment stretched between them, taut as wire. Then Samuel pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He felt her tears through his shirt, felt her body shake with years of suppressed grief and rage. "We'll face them together," he murmured into her hair. "No more ghosts, for either of us." She pulled back enough to look at him, and something shifted in the air between them. Samuel hadn't kissed a woman since before the war, hadn't thought he remembered how. But when Mary rose on her toes, when her lips met his, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people remembering what it meant to feel. Then, deeper, hungrier, filled with the desperation of those who know tomorrow isn't promised. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go," Mary said, but made no move to leave. "Stay." The word escaped before Samuel could stop it. "It's not safe on the trails at night." They both knew it was an excuse. The real danger was here, in this moment, in the feelings neither had expected or sought. But Mary nodded, and Samuel banked the fire while she settled into the chair by the hearth. "Tell me about her," Mary said quietly. "The woman in the photograph you carry." Samuel was surprised, but not shocked. Mary noticed everything. Her name was Catherine. We were engaged before the war. She promised to wait. But I came back different. Broken. She tried, but you can't love a ghost." He smiled ruefully. "She married a shopkeeper 2 years later. Has 3 children now, I heard. Do you miss her?" "I miss who we were. Young, foolish, believing the world made sense." He looked at Mary. "Do you miss who you were?" "Every day, but lately." She pulled a blanket around her shoulders. "Lately, I wonder if who I'm becoming might be worth the pain of getting here." They talked through the night, sharing truths that darkness made easier to speak, about fear and hope, about the weight of survival, about the strange gift of finding connection in the midst of danger. As dawn approached, they sat side by side, watching through the window as the forest lightened. Mary's head rested on Samuel's shoulder, his arm around her waist. It felt natural, right? Like pieces of a broken world clicking into place. "They'll come soon," Mary said. "Now that they know about us, they can't afford to let this stand." "I know. Are you ready?" Samuel thought about the fortifications he'd made, the weapons he'd cleaned and loaded, the evidence safely hidden. But mostly, he thought about the woman beside him, about having something to fight for beyond revenge or justice. "I'm ready." Mary turned to look at him. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. These weeks have been worth 12 years of hiding. You've given me back myself. You've done the same for me." She kissed him again, soft and sweet with promise. Then she stood, straightening her dress, transforming back into the respectable woman who would walk through town unnoticed. "Tonight?" she asked at the door. "Tonight, and every night after, if you'll have me." Bold words for a man with powerful enemies. "I've faced worse odds." She smiled, that transformative expression he'd come to treasure. "Yes, I believe you have. Until tonight, then." After she left, Samuel stood in the doorway watching the sun rise over his 30-cent cabin. Soon, Blackwood and his men would make their move. They would come with guns and torches, thinking to end this threat as they had 12 years ago. But they would find no easy victims here. They would find a soldier who'd remembered his purpose and a woman who'd reclaimed her strength. They would find 2 people who'd discovered something worth fighting for in each other. The forest sang with morning birds, peaceful and oblivious to human dramas. Samuel breathed deep, tasting possibilities on the air. He had work to do, weapons to check, defenses to strengthen. But for just a moment, he allowed himself to feel the warmth of unexpected happiness. Mary Fletcher had walked into his life warning of death. Instead, she'd brought him back to life. And for that gift, he would fight anyone who tried to harm her. Blackwood, Hayes, Morrison. They thought they owned this territory, ruled through fear and violence. They were about to learn that some things were stronger than fear, and that a man with nothing to lose was dangerous, but a man with something to protect was unstoppable. The first warning came 3 days later. Samuel found his mare's water trough overturned and fouled with what looked like animal remains. A crude message was scratched in the dirt. Leave. He cleaned the mess without comment, refilled the trough, and went about his day. That evening, he told Mary about it as she helped him reinforce the door with iron brackets. "So it begins," she said, testing the door's strength. "They'll escalate from here." The next morning, Samuel woke to find his newly repaired shutters torn off and his tool shed ransacked. Nothing stolen. That would have been too obvious. Just destruction meant to intimidate. Childish, Mary observed when she saw the damage. She'd taken to coming earlier now, bold in her defiance. Theodore Blackwood fancies himself a chess player, but this is checkers. They worked together to repair the damage, and Samuel noticed how natural it felt, moving in sync with her. She anticipated what he needed, handed him tools before he asked. They'd become a team without discussing it. The third warning was less subtle. Samuel returned from checking his trap lines to find a cross burning in his clearing. The flames cast dancing shadows on his cabin walls, and for a moment he was back at the war, watching Atlanta burn. But this wasn't Atlanta, and he wasn't a young soldier anymore. He doused the flames with buckets of water from the creek, the hiss of dying fire loud in the evening air. When Mary arrived, she found him sitting on his porch, rifle across his knees, watching the tree line. "They're getting bolder," she said, settling beside him. "Or more desperate." She leaned against his shoulder, a casual intimacy they'd developed. "I heard Morrison at the bank today. He was arguing with Blackwood, something about handling it properly this time. Dissension in the ranks. Good. Or dangerous. Desperate men do foolish things." As if to underscore her point, a shot rang out from the forest. The bullet sparked off the stone chimney, sending chips flying. Samuel pushed Mary down, covering her with his body as he scanned for the shooter. "Just one," he murmured. "Testing our nerve." Another shot, this one shattering what remained of a window. Samuel spotted the muzzle flash and returned fire, his rifle steady despite his racing heart. A cry from the woods, then crashing sounds of someone fleeing. "Did you hit him?" Mary asked, still pressed beneath him. "Winged him, maybe. Enough to send a message." They stayed low until full dark, then moved inside. Mary's hands shook as she lit the lamp, but her voice was steady. "They're not waiting anymore." "No, this was probably Hayes's idea. He always was impatient, from what you've told me." Mary laughed shakily. "You've learned your enemies well. First rule of war, know who you're fighting." She helped him board up the broken window, their movements efficient despite the tension. When they finished, she turned to him with an expression he couldn't read. "I need to tell you something." Samuel waited, noting the way she twisted her hands, a nervous gesture he'd rarely seen from her. "I haven't been entirely honest about that night, about my role in it." His chest tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Tell me." "Thomas didn't just stumble onto their conspiracy. I helped him. I was the one who overheard Morrison discussing the false surveys. I'm the one who encouraged Thomas to investigate." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "If I hadn't pushed him, maybe they'd still be alive. Or maybe they'd have found another reason to kill him. Men like that don't need much excuse." "You don't blame me?" Samuel pulled her close. "We all carry guilt for the dead, but it's not your fault evil men do evil things." She clung to him, and he felt the weight of her confession in the way she shook. "There's more. I kept copies of some documents. Hidden at my place. I was too afraid to do anything with them, but now you're not afraid. Now I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of letting them win." She pulled back to look at him. "We could send the copies to the federal marshal in Denver. Even if something happens to us, the truth would survive." It was a good plan. Smart. It also painted an even bigger target on their backs. "Do it," Samuel said. "Tomorrow send them. Use someone trustworthy. Old Pete at the trading post. He knew my father, hates what this town has become. He'll do it. They spent the rest of the evening planning, discussing contingencies and escape routes. But underneath the practical talk was an awareness that time was running short. The small harassments were over. Real violence was coming. As midnight approached, Mary stood to leave. "I should go, tomorrow." "Stay." Samuel caught her hand. "Please, it's not safe anymore, and—" He struggled for words. "I want you here, with me." She studied his face, then nodded. "Yes." That night they lay together on his narrow bed, fully clothed but entwined. Samuel held her close, marveling at how right she felt in his arms. They didn't speak of love. It seemed too fragile a word for what was between them. But as Mary's breathing deepened into sleep, he knew he would die before letting harm come to her. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Near dawn, he heard it. Horses, multiple riders, moving slow and quiet. He woke Mary with a touch, and she was instantly alert. "How many?" she whispered. "4, maybe 5. They're circling, looking for the best approach." They rose silently, taking positions at different windows. Samuel had prepared for this, creating firing positions with good coverage. Mary handled the rifle with easy familiarity. Another surprise from this remarkable woman. The riders emerged from the trees like phantoms. Samuel recognized Morrison's bulk, Hayes's nervous seat in the saddle. The others were hired guns, faces he didn't know. They stopped just outside rifle range, conferring. "Samuel Hawkins," Hayes called out, his reedy voice carrying in the still air. "We're here to make you an offer." "I'm listening," Samuel called back, though he kept his rifle trained on them. $500 in gold. You leave today, never come back, never speak of this place again. Generous. What makes my 30-cent cabin worth $500? Morrison spurred his horse closer. "Don't play games, Hawkins. We know the woman's been here. We know what poison she's been spreading. Take the money and go, or—" Samuel's shot took the hat off Morrison's head, sending it spinning into the dirt. The banker's horse reared, nearly throwing him. "That's close enough," Samuel said calmly. "And you should know. Everything Thomas McKenna knew, I know. Every document he had, I have. You kill us, and it all goes to the federal authorities." "You're bluffing," Hayes sputtered, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Am I? Ask yourself why I've stayed despite your warnings. Ask yourself what a man with nothing to lose might do with evidence of murder and conspiracy." The riders milled uncertainly. These weren't the same men who'd burned the McKenna cabin 12 years ago. Those had been young, fired with purpose and greed. These were older, softer, with more to lose. "1 week," Morrison finally called out. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that—" He didn't finish the threat, just wheeled his horse and rode away. The others followed, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Mary lowered her rifle, hands trembling slightly. "They'll be back with more men." "Yes, we could run, together. Start fresh somewhere they can't find us." Samuel considered it. The offer was tempting. A new life with Mary, free from this burden of justice. But he thought of the McKenna boys, of all the victims of these men's greed. "Could you live with that, knowing we let them win?" Mary's smile was sad but proud. "No, I just wanted to pretend for a moment that we could." They spent the day preparing for siege, bringing in water, checking ammunition, reinforcing weak points. As they worked, Samuel noticed Mary watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What is it?" "I'm memorizing you," she said simply. "In case." He pulled her close, kissing her with all the passion and promise he couldn't put into words. "We're going to survive this, both of us." "Promise." "I promise. We've come too far to fail now." As the sun set, they sat together on the porch, watching shadows lengthen across the clearing. The cabin that had cost 30 cents had become a fortress, a symbol of resistance against men who thought money could buy silence and fear could ensure compliance. "Whatever happens," Mary said, "I want you to know that you gave me back my life, my purpose, myself." "You gave me the same," Samuel replied, "and more." They sat in silence as stars emerged. Two people who'd found each other in the shadow of death and chosen love over fear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, greater dangers. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The week Morrison had given them stretched ahead like a lifetime in an instant. 7 days to prepare for war or find another way. 7 days to love and plan and hope. Samuel tightened his arm around Mary, feeling her solid warmth against his side. Let them come, he thought. Let them bring their hired guns and torches. They would find more than they bargained for in this 30-cent cabin. They would find 2 people with everything to fight for. The 7th night came with a blood moon rising over the pines. Samuel had spent the week turning his cabin into a battleground, digging trenches, setting traps, creating fallback positions. Mary had helped, her knowledge of the land proving invaluable. They'll come from the east, she said, checking the loads in Samuel's spare revolvers. The ground's most level there. Morrison's too fat to climb the ridge, and Hayes won't risk his neck on the cliff trail. Old Pete had successfully sent the documents to Denver, but they both knew help wouldn't arrive in time. This fight would be theirs alone. As darkness deepened, they took their positions. Samuel had given Mary his best rifle and stationed her at an upstairs window with clear sight lines. He would hold the ground floor, moving between prepared positions. Remember, he called up to her. Controlled shots. Make each one count. I remember. Her voice was steady. Samuel? Yes, I love you. The words hung in the air, precious and terrible in their timing. I love you too, he called back. Now let's live through this so we can say it properly. The attack came at midnight. They didn't try for stealth this time. Torches appeared through the trees, a dozen, maybe more. Samuel counted muzzle flashes as rifles opened up on the cabin. Glass shattered, wood splintered, but the reinforced walls held. Here they come, Mary shouted. Samuel sighted down his rifle barrel at the advancing shapes. These weren't the town fathers, but hired killers, men who did violence for pay. He dropped the first one clean center mass. The man spun and fell, torch rolling away into darkness. Mary's rifle cracked from above. Another attacker stumbled, clutching his shoulder, but more kept coming, spreading out to surround the cabin. The barn, Mary called. Samuel saw flames licking at his small stable. His mare screamed in terror. Cursing, he made a quick decision. Cover me! He burst from the side door, running low toward the barn. Mary's rifle sang overhead, keeping attackers pinned. Samuel threw open the barn door, and his mare bolted free, disappearing into the forest. At least she'd have a chance. A bullet tugged at his shirt as he sprinted back. He dove through the door as wood exploded where his head had been. That was foolish, Mary called down, but he heard relief in her voice. Couldn't let her burn. The battle intensified. Attackers tried the windows, the doors, even the roof. Samuel moved constantly, appearing at one window to fire, then racing to another position. Mary was deadly from her perch, her shots measured and accurate. Then Samuel heard what he'd been dreading, breaking wood from the back room. They'd found a weak spot. Mary! They're inside! He rushed toward the breach, meeting 2 men forcing their way through splintered boards. The quarters were too close for rifles. Samuel drew his revolver, firing point blank. One man fell immediately. The other grappled with him, trying to wrestle the gun away. They crashed into furniture, rolled across broken glass. The attacker was younger, stronger, but Samuel had experience. He got his thumb in the man's eye, heard him scream, then put a bullet in his chest. Samuel! Mary's voice high with fear. He ran back to find her cornered at the top of the stairs. A man had somehow reached the upper floor, must have climbed the outside wall. The attacker advanced on her, knife gleaming. Samuel took the stairs 3 at a time, but he'd be too late. Then Mary surprised them both. She reversed her rifle, swinging it like a club. The stock caught the man's temple with a crack like breaking timber. He tumbled down the stairs, landing at Samuel's feet, neck bent at an impossible angle. Nice swing, Samuel panted. Father taught me, said a gun's useful even when it's empty. A voice from outside interrupted them, Blackwood's cultured tones, using that theatrical projection he'd learned at university. Enough. Hawkins, you've made your point. Let's discuss terms. The only term I want is your neck in a noose, Samuel called back. Now, no need for crudity. You've killed 6 of my men. That's expensive. I'm prepared to offer you $10,000. You and your woman can go anywhere, start fresh. All I ask is the return of certain documents. Mary caught Samuel's eye. shook her head slightly. They both knew Blackwood would never let them leave alive, not with what they knew. "Counteroffer," Samuel shouted. "You and your friends confessed to murdering the McKennas. Take your chances with a jury." Blackwood's laugh was without humor. "You know that won't happen. Last chance, Hawkins. Take the money or burn with your cabin." "Then we burn." But they wouldn't go easily. Samuel had one more card to play. During the week, he'd discovered Thomas McKenna's final secret, a cache of dynamite hidden in the root cellar, probably intended for stump clearing. It was old, potentially unstable, but it would serve. "Mary, remember what I showed you yesterday? The cellar?" Understanding flashed in her eyes. "The emergency exit. Go, now, I'll follow. Together or not at all." There was no time to argue. More men were entering through the breach. Samuel grabbed Mary's hand, and they ran for the cellar stairs. Behind them, boots thundered through the cabin. The root cellar was cramped, earthen, with a narrow tunnel Thomas had dug leading to a concealed exit 50 yards from the cabin. Samuel lit the fuse he'd prepared. 60 seconds, maybe 90, if the powder had degraded. "Go! Go! Go!" They scrambled through the tunnel on hands and knees, dirt raining down, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. The exit was covered with branches and leaves. Samuel pushed through first, then pulled Mary after him. They'd made it 30 yards when the world exploded. The blast knocked them flat, ears ringing, debris raining down like hail. Samuel covered Mary with his body as chunks of wood and stone fell around them. When he finally looked back, half the cabin was gone, replaced by a smoking crater. Screams came from the wreckage. Men stumbled out, some on fire, others bleeding from dozens of wounds. The attack had become a rout. But Blackwood still stood at the tree line, his face illuminated by flames. Even at this distance, Samuel could see his rage. "Do you think this ends it?" Blackwood roared. "I own this territory. I own the law. You're dead, both of you." A new voice cut through the night. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, I believe you're under arrest." Federal Marshal Jonas Harrington stepped from the forest, backed by a dozen deputies. Their badges gleamed in the firelight. Behind them, Samuel spotted old Pete, grinning despite a black eye. "Made it to Denver in record time," Pete called out. Marshall was very interested in those documents. Blackwood went for his gun, but he was no gunfighter. Harrington's bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, fine suit soaking up mud and blood. "Theodore Blackwood, Cornelius Hayes, Josiah Morrison," Harrington announced formally. "You're under arrest for the murders of Thomas, Margaret, James, and Daniel McKenna. And from the look of things, attempted murder of these folks too." Hayes tried to run. He made it 10 feet before a deputy's rifle butt dropped him. Morrison, practical to the end, raised his hands in surrender. Mary stood slowly, Samuel's arm around her. They were covered in dirt, bleeding from small cuts, clothes torn and singed, but they were alive. "Ma'am," Marshal Harrington tipped his hat. "Your letter was quite persuasive. Sorry we couldn't arrive sooner." "You arrived exactly when needed," Mary replied with dignity that transcended her appearance. The cleanup took hours. Deputies rounded up surviving attackers, took statements, gathered evidence from the smoldering ruins. As dawn broke, Blackwood and his conspirators sat shackled in a prison wagon, finally facing the justice they'd avoided for 12 years. Samuel stood with Mary at the edge of what had been his clearing. The 30-cent cabin was gone, but somehow he didn't mourn it. It had served its purpose. "What now?" Mary asked, leaning into his embrace. "Now we rebuild, together, make something new on this land. The town won't welcome us. We've destroyed their power structure. Then we'll make our own welcome. There are good people here, people who've been afraid too long. Maybe it's time for a new beginning." Mary turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held love and hope and a future neither had dared imagine. "I know a preacher in the next county. Honest man, owes my father a favor." "Mary Fletcher, are you proposing to me?" "Someone has to. You're too proper to ask a lady you've compromised." Samuel laughed, the sound strange after the night's violence. "Then yes, absolutely yes." They kissed as the sun rose over the mountains, two survivors who'd found love in the shadow of death. Behind them, The last embers of the cabin died away. Ahead lay the hard work of building a life together, of healing a community poisoned by greed and fear. But they would do it together, and that made all the difference. The cabin that cost 30 cents had brought them war and pain, but also each other. In the end, Samuel thought as he held Mary close, it had been the bargain of a lifetime. 6 months later, spring painted the mountains with wildflowers and new beginnings. Where the old cabin had stood, a new structure was rising. Larger, stronger, built with willing hands from a community learning to heal. Samuel drove another nail into a beam, pausing to watch Mary directing a group of women arranging the kitchen. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, a simple gold band that meant more to him than all of Blackwood's stolen wealth. "Careful with that stove," Mary called out. "It came all the way from Denver." The women laughed, teasing her about her particular ways. But they came to help, these wives and daughters who'd once crossed streets to avoid her. The trial had changed everything. Blackwood, Hayes, and Morrison had faced justice in Denver, away from local influence. The evidence Mary and Samuel provided, combined with old Pete's testimony and Marshall Harrington's investigation, had been damning. Blackwood got 25 years, Hayes and Morrison 20 each. Other conspirators received lesser sentences, but all faced ruin. "Samuel." Young Tom Pruitt ran up, the store owner's son bright with excitement. "Pa says to tell you the lumber's here, and Ma sent more food for the workers." Samuel ruffled the boy's hair. "Tell your PA we're grateful, and thank your Ma for the pies." The boy scampered off, and Samuel smiled. Children played freely here now, their parents no longer afraid of crossing the wrong people. The town was changing, slowly but surely. "You look content," Mary said, joining him. Paint smudged her cheek, and sawdust decorated her hair, but she'd never looked more beautiful. "I am content. My wife is building us a fine home, the sun is shining, and nobody's shot at me in months." "Don't get too comfortable," she teased. "I heard the Jeffersons' cow got into our garden again. You might have to defend our vegetables." He pulled her close, not caring who saw. Let them see that love could bloom where hate had ruled. "I'll take cow battles over gunfights any day." The sound of approaching horses made them both tense. Old habits died hard, but it was only Marshall Harrington, making one of his regular visits. He'd taken a personal interest in the town's recovery. "Afternoon, folks," he called, dismounting. "Place is looking fine." "Thanks to good neighbors," Mary replied. "Coffee?" "Always." They sat on the new porch, watching the work continue. The marshal had news from Denver, updates on appeals, all denied, and recovered assets. Much of Blackwood's fortune was being returned to those he'd cheated, including funds for the local school Mary planned to start. "There's something else," Harrington said, setting down his cup. "The railroad company's sending representatives. Seems they're interested in the legitimate route after all, now that the corruption's been exposed." Samuel and Mary exchanged glances. The railroad would bring prosperity, but also change. Still, change wasn't always bad. "We'll be ready," Samuel said. As afternoon wore on, more people arrived. Some brought food, others tools or willing hands. The banker's widow, freed from her husband's shadow, donated books for Mary's school. The new minister blessed the rising walls. Even Samuel's mare had returned, thin but alive, and now grazed in a proper pasture. By evening, the frame stood complete. Workers gathered for a celebration meal, tables groaning under the weight of donated dishes. Someone brought out a fiddle, and soon music filled the air. "Dance with me," Mary commanded, pulling Samuel from his seat. "I don't really—" "I know. Neither do I. We'll learn together." They swayed to the music, clumsy but happy, while neighbors clapped and children giggled. This was what they'd fought for, not just justice for the dead, but life for the living. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Samuel thought about the journey that had brought them here. A 30-cent cabin, a woman's warning, a secret that powerful men would kill to protect. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "Regrets?" Mary asked, reading his mood as always. "None. You?" "Only that it took so long to find you." Old Pete raised his glass in a toast. "To Samuel and Mary Hawkins, for showing us that courage is contagious and love is stronger than fear." The crowd cheered, and Samuel felt his eyes burn with unexpected emotion. He'd come here seeking solitude, perhaps even death. Instead, he'd found purpose, community, and a love worth living for. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests departed with promises to return tomorrow, Samuel and Mary stood alone in what would be their bedroom. Through the unfinished walls, stars shone bright and countless. Thomas and Margaret would be glad, Mary said softly. Their deaths meant something, led to something better. The boys too, Samuel added. They'll be remembered now. Their story will be told true. They stood in comfortable silence, two souls who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to build something bright. Tomorrow would bring more work, walls to raise, a school to plan, a community to nurture. There would be challenges, setbacks, the ordinary struggles of ordinary life. But tonight, in their new home built on land that had seen too much sorrow, Samuel and Mary Hawkins held each other and knew peace. The 30-cent cabin was gone, but what they'd built in its place, love, justice, hope, was worth more than all the gold in Colorado. Come to bed, Mary said, tugging his hand. Tomorrow's a busy day. Every day with you is busy, he grumbled good-naturedly. And you wouldn't have it any other way. No, he agreed, following her. I wouldn't. The moon rose over their new home, silver light blessing new beginnings. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called, no longer a sound of warning, but of welcome. The ghosts of the McKenna place had finally found peace, and in their place, love had taken root. The cabin that cost 30 cents had been a beginning, not an ending. And for Samuel and Mary Hawkins, building their life on ground once soaked with tears, every sunrise brought new reasons for gratitude. They'd paid a higher price than 30 cents, in blood, in tears, in facing down evil. But what they'd purchased with their courage was priceless. A future together, a community reborn, and the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, love and justice prevail. In the new house built where sorrow once reigned, two hearts beat as one, and hope sang louder than any ghost ever could. Thank you for listening to this story, dear audience. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow lovers of Wild West tales. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Samuel and Mary's journey. Did their love story move you? What would you have done in their place? Your comments mean the world to me, and I read every single one. Until our next adventure in the Old West, keep riding tall in the saddle, partners.